It's opening day of hunting season, and it's game 3 of the World Series, and of course the regular Sunday night football. So we're very fortunate that anybody came. So, but it's the purpose of this expo is to let people know what opportunities exist to make their lives more comfortable at home or in their small business, and to save a little money there, and also to have less of a less of a carbon footprint in their home and their business. So there's at least 3 advantages to what these kinds of green things that we're going to talk about have to offer. And I'm very pleased to welcome Molly Bradford from SBS Solar and Aaron Hanson from the Axmen. I've never seen Molly's place of business, but I've seen the Axmen, and it has the most amazing collection of everything you can think of: outboard motors, planes, and it's just a fascinating. If you haven't ever been to the Axmen, go there, and of course you can see demonstrations of units of the photovoltaic systems, but you can also see an outboard motor from 1908, maybe, if they had it. It's probably there. So I guess Molly's going to start off, and again, welcome. And Molly, you and Aaron can figure out where to go. What's your presentation?
So I'm Molly Bradford. I work for SBS Solar. Until recently, we were called Sustainable Building Systems, and SBS was our nickname, and we've officially just changed our name to SBS Solar. So if you've heard of SBS and then SBS Solar, just so you know, it's actually the same company. So I got to meet with these guys and get a little idea of what they wanted us to cover, and I'm going to kind of go through that set of key points that they, that was the end of the slideshow, sorry. Go through that set of key points that these guys asked us to go over, and then Aaron and I want to talk about some of the more specific things that you guys have questions about as well, I think. And as we go through this, if anything is of interest to you, Aaron, you want to jump in? Let me know. I hope this doesn't auto advance. If it does, I'm in trouble. So I think part of the reason we're here today is just some interesting information from the Environmental Information Association. Our buildings are our primary use of energy and electrical consumption and emissions. So I think we're all trying to figure out how to use less or live off the grid, as some folks in the audience do. And that's where SBS Solar got started, understanding the implications of these percentages. So I think we're going to look at applications for home or small business in the reducing energy, talk a little bit about some grants, tax credits or alternatives for installs that are out there, and some website references, a little bit about payback, retrofitting on your home, energy efficiency retrofitting, and also utilizing energy audits and consulting from a do-it-yourself or a professional perspective. Is there anything else that people have specific questions about that you want to make sure we add into the agenda? Or you can just raise your hand, I think, as we go. It's an intimate group. Perfect. So, applications for home and small business, and a lot of these can be both do-it-yourself or professional, would be solar PV. That stands for photovoltaic. That means solar energy. Solar thermal, we see 2 main instances of that application, either a flat plate panel or evacuated tubes. And we at SBS Solar have chosen to not work with evacuated tubes too much anymore after the hailstorms in Bozeman last year destroyed nearly 50% or more of their evacuated tubes. We decided that was a pretty good test by Mother Nature for our region of the United States, and we kind of go with flat panel a little more.
Can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, I'm going to show a couple pictures of these different systems, and if you want to jump in at any time too to talk about different technologies, just go right ahead. So these are ground source heat pumps. I'm going to talk about these different things, and then I think when we get to some of these other points down lower, I think Aaron has some information on some of these wood-fired boiler. Solar sheet is something new to me, but Gary and Chuck brought it up, and I thought I'd put some info in here. I actually brought up a couple websites if we want to look at anything too. Tankless hot water panels. And I'm not going to talk a lot about micro wind and micro hydro applications, only because it generally takes a year-long test to do them, and you have to have a consistent wind speed for either a commercial or residential application. Likewise with hydro, that more often than not we're finding is not hugely applicable in our general area. However, there are people that know they have consistent wind, and then you do the test, and it is a year-long test. So that's all I'm really going to say about that. So photovoltaics, this is what a typical panel looks like. They're for a home or business application. They're about 3 by 5 feet. They can be anywhere from 200 watts to 280 watts per panel. Most of our grid-tied solutions in this area start at about 2 kW, 2 kilowatts, which is generally between 9 and 11 panels. And if you are a Northwestern Energy grid-tied customer, there's significant grants available. If you are a co-op customer, then there is not a PV grant, but there are state and federal tax credits still, and I'll get to some of that when I talk about tax credits. And the way a system pretty much works, you've got the array, which is however many panels you have hooked together. Then they go through to an inverter, which transfers it from DC to AC, and it ties into your main fuse box and powers your home. And we are also implementing a new microinverter. I don't know if you guys work with those at Axmen also. They are a single inverter for each panel, and in general, when you have an array on your structure or a pole mount array, something out on the land, if a certain amount of shading occurs, the whole array just sort of goes down and stops producing energy. With the microinverter technology, a microinverter for each panel in that array, if that panel has shading, it will go down, but the rest of the array that has sun keeps producing energy. We found that this allows us to install solar in a lot of instances that was not otherwise available in the past because of a telephone pole or one single tree that moved its shadow across the array over the course of the day. And the microinverters also, for people who are really techie and into evaluating all of their energy, have a desktop, computer top dashboard, and you can see how much energy each panel is producing at any given time of the day, and then track what your system has been doing over the course of the week, the month, the year. So, and your peaks and your lows. Do you want to say anything about PV?
Yeah. No. So yeah, my name is Aaron Hanson. For what it's worth, I'm an electrical engineer as my background. I came back to Montana about 5 years ago, and I run a group called Axmen Energy out of the store. And right now we have about 8 guys. We're installing systems ranging from photovoltaic grid tie systems to off-grid systems. I just showed a picture to Gary earlier. We just did a mountaintop site. So we're doing a lot of integrated systems, a lot of off-grid systems, a lot of hybrid systems. And I guess the interesting thing, and I guess the big thing that I want to bring up today, is just about the idea that it is a system. It all works together. It all integrates together. When we talk about the inverter isn't hanging out in isolation. It's integrated with the PV panels. So the whole thing really does and needs to work together. Photovoltaics is just, like I said, part of what we do. I've got a 2 kW system at my house, and I checked it this afternoon because it was a nice day and I was home, and I'd made about 5 kW today, which is not an insignificant amount of power, really, for my house. And I know my bill goes to $5 a month on the Northwestern pretty much all summer long. So, and that's just electric, but it's awesome. Like, that's a neat step to be able to make. Photovoltaics is, if there's anything out there, alternative energy-wise, that is reliable, does its thing day after day. You know, the crystalline panels, they've got basically no degradation due to UV. So you've got an 80-year product, a 60-year product. If you look at the way the warranties are written on photovoltaics, you know, they'll say it's a 30-year warranty and it'll be 10% degraded in 30 years, you know, if you get a good one. That's pretty phenomenal from a technology standpoint. So we're dealing with it's a different animal. It's very different than buying a car, even in a lot of ways buying a house. You know, you buy it once and it's good for a really long time. Somebody like me that's a little bit younger, you know, looking at this thing, it's going to be there for 40 years. So I bought a 40-year supply of energy now, and that's pretty much, it kind of blows your mind when you think about other things. You know, a lot of things have paybacks, you know, a lot of things have kind of a cost-benefit analysis associated with them, but a photovoltaic panel really will pay for itself multiple times over its lifetime. It just happens to be a really long time. So that's what's pretty neat about the technology, and why, you know, now is kind of an interesting time for photovoltaics. I mean, for a lot of time, historically, photovoltaics were really expensive, and that's definitely the case, and we've been in it for about 25 years. Most of our photovoltaics went to off-grid. If you look back 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, Sonelco up the Bitterroot there was probably one of the first photovoltaic companies in the whole U.S. And that's Dan Bramberg, who works with you guys now. Mm-hmm. And one of the other things, you know, what's interesting about that is, what were they doing? Were they selling solar panels to anybody? No, they were selling solar panels to oil rigs, pretty much people that are off-grid. So off-grid is really where the technology's been, if you go back 20 years. Now, obviously, you know, Germany, Japan, now the U.S., there's a lot of photovoltaics coming into basically what we call the mainstream. And what we see happening now is photovoltaics, solar cells like this have gotten so inexpensive that they are actually pretty darn attractive from an accountant's point of view. So if you take the payback calculation, you figure out the tax credits, you figure out if it makes sense or not, I think there's a very, very good argument to say that this makes a lot of sense right now. And right now at the store we installed a 5.6 kW tracker. I don't know if anybody's seen it. We did that for financial reasons. You know, we're a business. Got a lot of people looking over my shoulder, seeing if we're making payroll. But that is a financial decision that we made as a business. And I think there's a lot of other people out there that are making that decision too. You've got a lot of interesting dynamics right now with photovoltaics, and one of the other ones that's really fascinating is what's happening with currency and stuff around the world. People don't have a lot of great options in terms of investments. And if you look at something that's going to be around for 50 years, 40 years, let's just say 30 years, I mean that would be classified as an investment in my mind. I mean that's about as good an investment as anything else out there. And so when people are seeing their 401ks and their different bank accounts go down, people with a little bit of disposable money are looking at things that they can invest in that are pretty reliable and are going to do things long term. And we've had a big resurgence of people, I would say in the last 6 months, that are looking for things that they can invest their money in for the long term. And you know, there's a lot of reasons to do photovoltaics. Financial is definitely becoming one of them. And so now, any questions?
And I think just to frame where the cost is, I know we're all, we just did a little survey. I think all of our costs are pretty similar. SBS has only been around about 3 years, but like Aaron said, Dan Brandborg, who started Sonelco, is our solar guy, and I've been with them 1.5 years. And when I started, The basic 2 kW system 18 months ago was, between $17,000 and $18,000, and it's just dropped for pretty much everyone in town to around 12,000 or just under that. And if you're on Northwest Energy and you take the grant off of $6,000, a 30% federal tax credit, and a $500 per Montana state payer, so either $500 or $1,000 for your house, it brings that system to just under $3,000 to install. It is insanely affordable. So I think just to put that number in your pocket, and that's an average of Axmen, SBS, Solar Plexus, and Elko, we're all within a few $100s of each other, and it's pretty awesome.
When you say 2 kW, that's over what period of time? That's for a month?
Well, 2 kilowatts is the size of the system, and so it produces energy. Northwestern does an annual net metering contract with you, and so do the co-ops. And so basically what that means is you take the size of the system and the amount of daylight hours of sunshine that you have to produce, and on average in Montana, I think we're at 4.5.
Yeah.
Is that right? Seattle's 2.5, Phoenix is 6 or 7, and
Yeah,
we're
well,
on average 4.5 daylight hours.
Yeah,
of
when I
peak
figure,
production, is
when
that-
I go to a house, you know, I mean, a lot of it's about the side of a house. So you're talking about the shading and stuff. So you've got a roof, it faces south, but there's a lot of other information that's really important to determine how much energy you can make in a year. And that's kind of the fair way to look at it. I mean, it's a net metering system, so anything extra that it produces goes into the power grid, and you get credit for that. They don't cut you a check, but you do get credit for that. So if you pull it out later, you know, so everything you produce, you get credit for. The annual number is really the critical number. So when people want to figure out whether it makes sense or not, the question is how much energy is it going to make in a year? Like, that's really the only way we can really look at it if we're on a net metering system. If we're off grid, then we really care about, you know, specific times, because we can't store energy, really. We have to make it and use it at the same period of time. So a 2 kW system like mine today made 5 kW, which is 5,000 watts in one day. Yeah, I mean, when I checked it, you know, but what that is, that's 2,000 watts of solar module. So a solar module is rated by absolute best conditions, you know, in a sunny, bright world that's not too hot, not too cold.
Yeah, today was actually a pretty
And-
ideal day because it
Yeah.
wasn't too hot out.
In a lot of ways, you know, and then mine are on a pole, so I have mine cranked up at a pretty steep angle, which is good because the sun starts dropping down, you know, in the winter. But if it's on a roof and the roof is fixed at 30 degrees, then you take that into account. So the only real fair way to do it is to do what we call it's basically a simulation, 365 days. We tell the computer where the panels are located. You know, I mean, and that's very different. You can imagine Missoula is very different than Bozeman.
That's kind of,
Solar Pathfinder.
well, that's the Pathfinder,
Yeah.
and then I have a simulation picture actually right here. That's a-
So, and then your electrical, you know, demand will change throughout the year too. But the interesting thing from my perspective about the grid tie scenario is you have the ability to store that energy for free. It's 100% efficient. You're storing it in the grid, and it's 100% efficient. It goes into the grid and you get credit for it. You don't have to store it. You don't have to maintain it.
You have
If
to buy batteries.
If you use it, you use it. If you don't use it, doesn't hurt you. And you can always get it back later. So when my bill goes to $5, I'm not worried about losing energy. I'm not going to go turn on extra stuff. I know that I'll get it back, you know, in September and October. And it's pretty phenomenal. And the deal with net metering is that the reason why we have net metering is because the government is cramming it down the utilities' throats, essentially. They're saying you will enable net metering, and that's why we have it. The utilities go and they turn that green energy into green money, because there is a lot of credits associated with having your, you know, so that utilities are definitely benefiting by this in a lot of different ways. The distributed nature of a photovoltaic system is pretty interesting, and this is why Germany and a lot of countries are really pushing it. And eventually, I really do believe eventually when photovoltaics or alternative energy gets to be appreciated for what it can really do to the power grid and everything else, we're going to have what we call a feed-in tariff. And they're doing it in a few places in the US right now. They're doing it in Ontario. And a feed-in tariff is 2 meters instead of 1. And the 1 meter is the photovoltaic meter, and it gets a lot more credit. You get, you know, instead of 8 cents a kilowatt hour, you get 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So you actually get, they'll pay you an extra amount for anything that is solar. And
they actually do that in a bunch of European countries.
yeah, Germany, anybody that's really serious about photovoltaics across the world does this feed-in tariff scenario. And that's why when you drive through Germany or you're on the train and you look out and every single farm has solar panels covering it, they're farming the sun. And it's, you know, it's very subsidized. It's not, you know, separate that, but it's subsidized, and it's a very smart way for the government to encourage it. And it's very good for the power grid too, because the power grid is, as you know, very stretched. And a lot of these programs, like the USB program, which is the $6,000 credit and everything like that, most of those are subsidized through Bonneville Power, and they require this effort to reduce consumption. You know, they're not, the power companies aren't giving away light bulbs, I mean, necessarily, because they want to. They're doing it because they have an obligation to reduce consumption. And that obligation goes directly to their bottom line, because what they're running into is a capacity issue on their existing power infrastructure. So what's going to happen long term is they're going to have to buy some new substations. They're going to have to buy some new power lines because people are using more power. And if you look at those curves of what people are using for energy, it's going up like crazy. So the power companies are very concerned about that, because if it goes up much more, they have an obligation, a legal obligation, to provide energy. In order to do that, they've got to spend a whole bunch of money on power infrastructure. So the biggest thing that's in everybody's mind is the easiest way to combat this issue is to get people to be more conservative. And photovoltaics is definitely, you know, it's not conservation, but it's energy generation. But we can talk about that later, how I've seen that kind of roll together. Once you get people excited about energy, and they start thinking about it a little bit more, then all of a sudden people start conserving more. And photovoltaics is, I think, my case is the perfect example. It's, I think, you go to a lot of houses and you walk around and they want to put photovoltaics on their roof, and you walk through and you see their 1950s refrigerator and their old freezer, and then you know, they don't have any compact fluorescence, and they want to put all these photovoltaics on the roof, you know, and you're just kind of thinking, geez, you know, cart before the horse, or, you know, chicken and egg, or, you know, shouldn't they conserve first and then save later? And I can tell you from my personal experience, the answer was no. Like, you know, I mean, I put the photovoltaics up and that was cool, but then the next thing that went through my mind is, okay, how do I get my bill down to 0 in the summer? Like, where's that energy actually going? And so people really do change their behavior once they invest in it. And I think the Prius is probably my favorite example on how that really happens psychologically, because it's got that little thing that, I don't know if anybody's driven one, but I've been told that they have it's got a little, basically a gas meter, and people start driving different. It, you know, it tells you what your mile per gallon is, and it's in your face. And I think once people start looking at that stuff, they really start changing their behaviors. And part of the reason why they're changing their behavior is because they invested in a really efficient car. It gets awesome gas mileage, and they'd like to take advantage of that. And the same thing happens with alternative energy kind of across the board. If you can get people excited about energy, then then people start doing the other thing, which isn't the fun part, you know. I don't think compact fluorescents are that cool, you know. There's nothing that much wonderful for me about a new refrigerator or this or that, you know. But getting people to take those steps is really the goal. Yeah, sorry.
Well said. So this is an example, moving on to other types of solar renewable energy, of solar thermal hot water, and these are evacuated tubes. So this is what the tubes would look like. I don't actually have a picture of flat panel with me. They do, they're fatter than a solar panel, and about the same width, but fairly narrow. They come in different sizes, and they have small little tubing below the glass. So they are protected from hail or other types of weather, and the technology behind them is slightly different. A lot of folks will argue, and most technology will say that solar thermal is actually, it is way more efficient than solar electricity, than PV, and you'd think that people would buy it first, but because electricity is the big buzz in the United States right now, and what Aaron was talking about with electric companies and the grants and subsidies available right now in the United States, PV is just what's sexy. Right now it's what people are interested in, and it's what they're seeing. But thermal is an excellent investment. It's a really quick way to produce hot water for your home, and to do heating if you want to do that with it, and it's not horribly expensive. It's without any grants, but still the renewable energy tax credits and the state tax credits, it's only a little bit, it used to be cheaper than PV, now it's a little bit more expensive than that basic 2 kilowatt system.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd agree with that. I mean, I would say it's always cheaper than PV if you look at cost per watt. And the reason is,
I was just talking about the install cost.
oh, okay, yeah, sorry, no, definitely. I mean, you gotta go up, you gotta throw it on the roof, you've gotta integrate it with the tank. I think the biggest reason politically why solar thermal hasn't had the buzz is because a lot of our stuff is controlled by other people. Like a lot of the subsidies, a lot of the pushes, and a lot of that's political. And solar thermal is hard to meter. Photovoltaics, it's easy. Like you put up a bunch of them, you know how much energy you're going to get off them. Solar thermal is significantly harder to meter. You can't send it to your neighbor's house or this or that. If it's on your roof, you need to use the hot water that you create. It's much more individualized. And across the world, it really has had a lot of issues taking off. Now, solar thermal, I guess to put it in perspective, you know, if a watt's a watt and energy is energy, the sun puts out 2,000 watts, 1,000 watts per square meter. 1,000 watts per square meter is kind of the standard one. And that's what everything's rated on, is the sun doing its thing on a nice sunny day. And a 200-watt panel is a pretty big panel. A photovoltaic electric panel, you know, is a pretty big panel. My standard solar thermal panel is 1,500 watts. So it's almost, you know, and it's probably a third the cost just for the panel itself. And when you look at a home as a system, you know, and you do a pie chart of where your energy is at, 20% of that is typically, 20% is typically and pretty easily attributable to domestic water. And I think domestic water is not a sexy thing to get excited about. In a lot of ways, people have trouble with that, you know, as being a serious consumer of energy. But if you think about it from a practical perspective, you know, you think about how long it takes and how much energy it takes to heat water on the stove. You know, domestic water is a wonderful thing, and obviously hygiene is a really big deal, and we don't want to, you know, but if you think about it historically and everything else, hot water, you know, it starts at 40 degrees, goes to 120 degrees, it touches your body once and goes down the drain, and you go through a lot of it, you know, you go through a lot of homes, and this is the other thing, is it's pretty much all over the map in terms of what people consume for hot water. There's a lot of government statistics on it, but it's all over the map, and I've kind of learned after being in a lot of homes that, you know, you don't judge people's hot water. You can have the greenest, most environmentally friendly guy that just absolutely loves his showers, or maybe his teenage daughter, you know, doesn't care about the environment as much as their dad. And so hot water consumption is all over the map. It's incredibly energy intensive. It's relatively easy to fix. And again, you know, we're looking at something that is a solution to that. We're doing typically about 70% of your hot water a year with solar thermal systems. And, you know, we're coming in somewhere around $7,000 is where we're coming in on those systems. But it's a 30-year deal. I mean, it's pretty much done for 30 years. There's very little maintenance. You know, the warranties are rock solid. So you're buying a hot water heater that's going to just sit there and churn away for 30 years. It's hard for me, you know, I've been selling solar thermal for 5 years now. Probably installed 80 to 100 systems in those years. It's interesting to think about it. If you think back, and I'm not old enough to do it, but with Jimmy Carter, what's really fascinating is how many solar thermal systems got installed during that time period, and then they just disappeared, you know. And what happened back then is very different than what's available now. The Germans never stopped the technology. They didn't just quit, you know. Politically, they didn't quit either. And so most of the technology now is definitely, you know, 20, 30 years ahead of where it was back then. Certifications and everything really ensure quality. But there is actually a surprising number of 1980s Jimmy Carter era solar thermal systems still out there that operate. And I meet people every day, almost every day, that have had them or still have them. And it's kind of neat, you know. You get a system that's 20 years old, and you ask the person, does it make sense? You know, was it a good investment? You know, and it's just obvious. Like, of course, it was a great investment. Yes.
So is the output of this system dependent on cloud cover and stuff, or is it still?
No, not as much. Not as much. The technology is thermal, not electric. So with photovoltaics, you rely on essentially perfect conditions. Partial shading or a leaf or dirt have a dramatic effect. Angle has a dramatic effect. Solar thermal, one of the neat things about it is it's analog, so you cover half the thing with snow. Well, you just covered half the thing with snow. You know, you didn't kill the output entirely. You haven't destroyed its potential. With photovoltaics, I can tell you mine, I go out and I hose it off. I'll double my output. I live right next to a farm, and I'll double my output when I clean that thing. So you have a very robust technology because it's, you know, when we talk about efficiency, you know, typically that's how much energy is there and how much energy actually got to the house or whatever, to the grid. Photovoltaics is about 15%, 16%. There's some new ones, you know, that are 20%. Used to work for the government, you know, in the space shuttle. I mean, the spaceships, they've got 30, 50% efficient solar cells, but they're ridiculously expensive. So that's what we're doing. Photovoltaics is 15%. Crystal pellet cells are 15, 16% efficient. Solar thermal is 95% efficient. So that's really why. I mean, that's really the big reason why it has a big advantage. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a really old boiler.
Okay. I love it.
Okay. And it's a hot water radiator
Yeah.
system.
Fin tube around the perimeter like this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And can that type of a heating system be replaced, the boiler be replaced with this type of a thing?
No. No. And we do have really awesome options for that, and it's essentially a different boiler. You know, the neat thing about making hot water for domestic water with...
This is domestic water. You wouldn't put it through in-floor tubes or anything?
I can, and I have, and but I guess the neat thing about solar thermal for domestic, let's start there, is because you take showers all summer long. The bad thing about solar thermal, specifically for space heating, is that, well, the technology's run into this thing that's called winter, you know, and all of a sudden, you know, you need to heat the most and there's the least possible sun, so then you oversize the system significantly in order to do space heating. And then what's, you know, nobody ever talks about this, but when we talk about solar thermal, you know, we want every tube in this case, with this picture, every flat panel, every part of it to be doing everything it can all year long. We don't ever want to overproduce. We want to make that investment, you know, totally utilized, 100% utilized. Your boiler sits down there half the year and doesn't do anything, but you know, for solar thermal, in order to really make it make sense, we want to utilize 100% of what it's able to do. If we were to size a solar thermal system for space heating in the middle of December in a snowstorm, you know, well, honestly, we couldn't. So that's,
We don't have a big enough roof.
yeah, that's where the issue is. All these technologies really, you know, are all geared towards supplemental. So when we talk about alternative energy, we're not really talking about a silver bullet. It really isn't a end-all, be-all, you know, problem-solved kind of deal. Even the solar thermal systems that I've done for space heating are integrated with the space heating system, and they do a percentage of the space heating system. And the best that the Germans can do right now, on average, you know, I mean, there's obviously over-the-top stuff, you know, that little thermos bottle houses with tons of collectors on them, but you know, the average that they would expect in Germany is about 20% energy savings, and that's with a radiant floor. So a very low temperature heat emitter on the floor, integrated with solar thermal, and that makes sense at that point. But for your average house, no, it doesn't. A boiler is awesome, you know, and I think there's a ton of potential there in the boiler world. Talk about that later if you want. I mean, there's a lot of really good options. Solar thermal really fits into domestic water.
So ground source, do you guys do much with ground source?
We don't.
Okay, we work with a ground source partner up the Bitterroot called Ambrose Ambrose Plumbing and Heating, and he deals with high efficiency furnaces and ground source. That he's our expert. And ground source is essentially harnessing the consistent temperature below the Earth's surface, whether it's through wells, ponds, you drill down or run the loops. You can have a open loop system, which takes from one, goes to the other, a closed loop system, which runs through, for instance, a pond or another water source. And essentially, the temperature and underneath the surface of the Earth remains consistent in around 60 degrees. And 55, 60 degrees. And so you can take that temperature of water that's coming in through the ground source heat pump, or heating and cooling essentially. And then in winter, all you have to do is then use the energy to heat your home from 65, let's say, to from 55, let's say, to 68, right? Or 66 or 62 or whatever you keep your thermostat out, or 75, whatever we keep ours at 66. And in summer, likewise, suddenly you have this consistent cool water coming in at about 55 degrees, and you can use it to cool the air down in your home in summer. And I am not the expert in ground source, but SBS, like I said, works with these guys. We install systems in town in Missoula, out of town, in the Flathead, in the Bitterroot. So if that's something that you're interested in, I also recommend to people who are looking for some sort of renewable technology in their homes, and they do live in a co-op market, to consider ground source first, because it is what the co-ops are subsidizing right now through a grant. In general, they are not offering the PV grant that Northwestern Energy is. Northwestern does not offer a ground source grant. So just something to think about there. And ground source is extremely efficient. If you have oil or propane at home, it's about 300% efficient over that. If you're coming from a standard furnace, it's about 1.5 times more efficient than that. So people see their gas bill or the propane bills drop significantly, sometimes astronomically, but your electricity bill does go up a little bit then, because that's how it's powered, with the pump.
If you are not near a pond or something like that, can you just,
They drill wells, then they'll drill.
so you just drill down?
They'll drill down or they'll do trenches. So they can either drill trenches or they'll drill an in and out well or a single well. Yeah. And one other thing that you can do is you can couple it with heating your water. And so if you have your hot water tank, they can run the coils for the pump around it. And then like the way a refrigerator works, the coils sort of heat up as it's cooling things. There's a natural heat produced in that system. Those coils go around your water tank. You can also heat your water up to about 120 or 130 degrees if you want to integrate those systems all at the same time. So it's sort of an extra. Just it wasn't known obviously from the start, but it's like an extra bonus. So it can be integrated with your heating from the residual heat that comes off the compressor.
Is there kind of a rough cost about associated
Gosh.
with
It's pretty expensive. I feel like the initial costs are like in the 20,000s, but then when you add their 30% federal tax credit and state renewable energy credit, and if you're at a co-op, you add the grants, and then there are some other rebates associated with the certain systems that you put in. It brings it down pretty significantly. You're still looking at $15,000 in that range, but because you end up cutting bills back so significantly, the payback on those is about 5 years.
What would a retrofit look like for the heat distribution system in the house?
I feel like in the homes that they've gone into, the heat pump it's like a box that's kind of like about that big. And so they go into where your current HVAC is and they pull out your furnace, and then they have this other box that comes in, and then I don't know exactly how the rest of it works because I haven't actually been on the install, but they just are able to, they're sized sort of similarly to furnaces, and they're able to work within the same space.
And then they just blow the air across the heat exchanger?
Yeah, that must be, yeah.
So there's water to water, which is a ground loop. You pull the cave temperature water out of there, or in the case of an aquifer, if you're doing a pump and dump where you're pumping out of a hole into another hole, it's whatever the groundwater temperature is, so that can vary a lot seasonally. And then you've got two options. You've got water to water.
And this one shows
Or you've
water to
got-
water, like, so using
Right.
it for radiant.
Or water to air, and water to air is just a standard forced air system typically, and then water to water is just what you do if you had a boiler in that case. But then you also need to look at fluid temperatures and stuff associated with the water to water. Water to water pretty much ties in with low temperature, which is like radiant floor or low temperature panel radiators. Water to water is typically significantly more efficient. But also rarer in Montana especially, because there's a lot fewer radiant floors than there are forced air systems. And people want air conditioning, so if you go into a lot of the bigger buildings downtown that have gone geothermal, most of them have done it, because they'll spend as much money on their heating as they will on their air conditioning. And the air conditioning aspect of ground source is pretty nice. So.
Yeah, that's good that you mentioned that from a business standpoint. And another thing too is if you're in a business with a lot of computers, there are air source heating and cooling pumps, and those are often used in IT rooms since you need to keep the air temperature cooler in where you have like mainframes and servers, and it works similarly, but it just uses air. So, okay. So before we move on, does anybody have any other questions? Some of the other topics that there are other renewable energy or energy saving options in the whole HVAC and electricity realm. I can close this down and bring up the page on a couple websites. Some of the ideas were, questions about solar sheet. Let me bump back up there. Suggestions, and if people are interested, we can talk about them. Tankless hot water panels, high efficiency wood fire boilers. Is there any other stuff that folks want to touch on, or what are those?
What are people excited about being able to do? I mean, is it about, I mean, what are you guys thinking in terms of, environment? Is that a big deal? Is your power bill a big deal? What are people, are people just excited about technology and they just want to know what's cool?
I know one of the big things that's going on is this new high efficiency boiler they want to put in out at the university. And
Yeah.
A lot of people don't understand how.
The biomass that they're talking about doing?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't understand
What it
how
is
some
and
of that works. We're an old
yeah.
slash burning boiler.
Well, I could talk about that a little bit. One of our companies that we work with is Wiesmann, and they're German. They have a whole line of similar sized boilers to what's going in out there, and we've been working with the Forest Service and a couple hospitals on integrating. And in this case it's pellets or chips. So the fuel supply isn't hunks of wood or pieces of trees. It's processed, and it's chips or pellets. And what's going in out there is chips. And what the technology is we're actually, when you talk about burning wood, like in your yodel, it has essentially the same kind of technology, which is secondary combustion. So you drive off a lot of energy by heating the wood. You essentially melt the wood, if that makes any sense, and you drive off a gas. And the Germans during World War II, they used to drive around in vehicles with trunks full of wood chips, and they'd actually create this gas and run it through their internal combustion engines and drive around because they didn't have any fuel to run their vehicles with. So what we're actually burning in a wood gasification boiler is syngas, and we're burning it at such high temperatures that we're just annihilating everything that you would consider bad typically about burning wood. And it's forced, it's electronically motivated, it has what we call lambda sensors in the exhaust pipe, so it's controlling the fuel to air mixture very, very well. And in terms of, there's a lot of ways to qualify, or quantify exhaust emissions and stuff, but a lot of them comes down to parts per million, this and that. And these technologies are state of the art. They get it down to, and again, we're not burning, old things that we just found, out in the woods. This is processed wood that got processed. It got dried appropriately, and now it's getting burned. So that's kind of what's going on at the university. And from my perspective, it's I'm in Bonner, and what's interesting about it is that there is definitely a desire for jobs. There's a wood products industry that still, wouldn't mind going back to work to a certain degree. I think it is important that, that we embrace whatever the latest thing is, whatever the most up-to-date technology is. And I think biomass is one of those things, again, where, the U.S. really got away from that technology for a lot of years. And there's a lot of different cases. There's fuels for schools. There's a lot of biomass that has been installed. Some of it has been done right. Some of it has been done really, really wrong. And but the technology is really there. And if you look at the rest of the world, biomass is a really big deal. And they're really figuring out how to do it really right. And I think it's awesome what the university is doing. I think I've heard a lot of other things too, but there's always a political side to everything, and I don't know exactly what their motivations are. From my perspective, we sell a lot of wood gasification boilers for residential use, which are under about 500,000 BTUs, and the idea is essentially the same, but instead of using processed wood, we use wood that people have cut, piled up, and dried. And the amount of energy in wood is pretty phenomenal. If you just take a piece of wood and look at it, really realize, how much energy that is, and the fact that it's relatively renewable. I mean, there will be more trees that grow. You know, how they get processed, how they get harvested and everything is definitely up for debate, but I would say, you know, having been to Germany a few times, I know our Forest Service has been over to Germany quite a few times to figure out exactly how they treat their forests, and they do a lot of things that are very different than what we do, because they see their forests as a resource, like they really do. They don't have, you know, giant tracts of wilderness. You know, there's so many little towns in that country that it blows your mind, but they definitely have tons of forests, and they treat them as a resource, at least a lot of them, and they utilize that wood, and it's a big part of their economy. So we do a lot of what we call basically a wood gasification boiler for residential use, and the application for that is somebody that has land, they have trees on the land, and if they don't burn the wood and do something useful with it, they'll just burn it in a big giant slash pile at the end of the year. Or they'll burn it in their wood stove in the house. So you're giving people an option for energy that they have laying around to heat their homes. And it's pretty phenomenal what people are able to do when you give them these wood boilers. I mean, what they're able to do in terms of just essentially cutting out propane use entirely for all kinds of different things. But those are really, you know, if you're looking at like a silver bullet, like here's something that I sold a customer and it just kind of solved all their problems. Wood boilers are definitely one of those things, because people do, you know, specific people have a ton of wood. It's laying around, you know, they're clearing trees every year, cleaning up the brush and everything else. They end up with all this wood, and now you're giving them a way to use it efficiently, you know, and everything else. So anyhow.
I think she just,
I was going to ask if you'd tell us what that solar sheet is.
oh, sure. And what were you going to ask?
Oh, well, I guess that in answer to Aaron's question earlier about what you're looking for, we're not quite as young as you. I mean, we're not even partly as young as you. But we do want to.
I just turned 30.
That we could do on our house that would be good for
Yeah.
the value of the house, and that would good for the environment,
Right.
and that would, you know, that would also, you know, make our life a little bit easier,
So,
perhaps for our paying bills. So I guess all of those things are things of interest to us. What
Yeah.
we do to our house,
right,
and our payback is limited,
right,
but we'll be able to sell the house for a greater amount
right.
Yeah.
if it has something on it that makes sense.
Well,
So
that's-
what kinds of things like that.
Yeah.
And so what I would gather from what you've said is that the solar thermal is a definite plus, as well as the photovoltaic on a post, you know, outside the house.
Photovoltaics on the house actually give a fast enough payback now, with the way the prices have dropped by probably 25 or 30% over the last year and a half. But I actually have a payback calculator on here for PV that I was going to show you guys. And a couple other things, like the top 8 or 10 things you can do on your own at home for payback as well, for energy efficiency. If you don't want to invest in a larger renewable energy type system, you just want to tighten up your home for a shorter payback. But I'd be interested to hear what you think is the best payback. Like, just off of what...
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens is, yeah, that's what's interesting, I guess, is what are the motivations? What are people motivated by? And you know, at the end of the day, it costs money. So there's a cash outlay, and why? You know, why are we doing this thing or that thing? And for solar thermal, I mean, it's all over the map, and it's really interesting for me, because I really like asking customers, well, why did you do that? You know, why did you spend that money? What was your motivation? And sometimes they're really honest with you up front. Sometimes they're really not, and sometimes you don't ever really get a real answer. I think the desire to do something good is kind of within everybody. You know, everybody wants to do something that matters and makes a difference. I definitely do. I don't want to install junk, you know, that breaks tomorrow. I want to be proud of you know, where my money's going and what my time is doing. And I think that really drives a lot of our customers more than a lot of them will admit it. You know, they want to buy something that's really, really good and really going to last. I would say for alternative energy, what's tricky is figuring out what you're really buying. I've seen a lot of photovoltaic systems that have been sold to really nice people on houses in Missoula that are facing the wrong way. You know, the sun is that way, you know, and they're on a roof that's facing pretty much east or pretty much west or behind a tree or covered with vines, or, you know, they wanted to have a vineyard and a solar array at the same time, and, you know, nobody educated the customer to the point where they really made a good decision. And I guess, you know, the technology doesn't do it by itself, you know. Insulation is number one. You know, if you're looking at just straight up payback stuff, insulating, figuring out where those gaps are, and then that includes windows and stuff like that. I mean, I don't think anybody really argues with that too much. What I would say is insulation, windows, and all that sometimes are a lot more difficult to change. You know, I mean, we look at a church like this, and, you know, you're going to change out all your stained glass and put in, you know, super high efficiency windows, or, you know, how is that really going to happen? Are you going to rip all your stucco off your walls and redo your walls? Like, what's really, you know, what's the process for that? Solar thermal is a lot of fun because it's something that you can go in a day, maybe 2 days, depending on, you know, where you're at. But and you can put it on, you can get in, you get out, you install the system, and you're done, you know, for 30 years. And that's kind of cool. I mean, there's a lot of practical side to, you know, what you can do and if it makes sense or not. And solar thermal, photovoltaics is kind of the same way. It's, I want to put this pole in the backyard. You go in, you do it, you're in, you're out. I think the resale value of homes is really going to be fascinating. It already is to a certain degree. There's a lot of brand new homes that have been built in the last 5 years that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. I mean, it's new, but that's pretty much it. You know, I mean, it's built worse than you know, anything most of you guys, you know, ever, you know, have lived in your life. You know, so that's kind of what I see as interesting. Is I see people looking at energy bills down the road and saying, you know, I don't want to buy this house because it costs too much money to live in it. You know, this house doesn't, you know, it has nice granite countertops, but the energy bills, like, who can afford that, you know? And so I think homes that use very little energy are going to be really attractive. Yeah.
I can add one thing to the list of reasons why a person would do this that appeals to me. I mean, I like all those reasons that you mentioned. You know, that they're active in me, but the thing that I think about a lot in recent years is security. I mean, those big grids are just too vulnerable to, you know, break down and sabotage and stuff. And
Definitely.
Unfortunately, though, to debunk that feeling, unless you have a battery backup, if you have a grid-tight solar system and the grid goes down, so does your solar system.
oh, really?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of advantages to being grid-tied because you produce more in summer but use less, so that you bank that for the winter. But you know that if you're overproducing right then, your neighbor's using it at the same time, you're giving back, it's a good investment, all the stuff Aaron said, but that actually is the one downer. If the grid goes down, unless you do battery backup hybrid system.
Solar thermal is totally self-contained.
Yeah, it requires a little bit of electricity to run it too. So the big challenge is, and this is honestly probably the interesting. I mean, one of the biggest things that people bring up is, I mean, I think around the country, if you were to drive around the country and ask people, you know, what's going on, you know, I did a national interview for a national radio show. Basically, the guy was driving around on his bicycle and asking people what the word sustainability means. You know, so that was like the question for the show. And he'd just drive around the whole country and ask everybody, and everybody had a different answer. And you get to the city, and it's all about working together, and you know, having community gardens, and you know, really knowing your neighbors. And you get to Montana, and it's all about, you know, doing it by myself, you know, and independence. And you know, unfortunately, the power grid and everything, I mean, it's all geared for communities. It's all geared for for everybody working together, and even off-grid, you know, we're still tied to, so, you know, what I really see as kind of a movement is people figuring out how to have some of their own food, you know, figuring out what they're going to do with their chickens, you know, figuring out this and that. And then the other really interesting thing about it is just, you know, if you look at kind of historical, what happens when the power grid goes down? It typically doesn't go down entirely. It does is rolling blackouts. So what that means to me is that you figure out how to make your home as efficient as you possibly can, and then those blackouts don't affect you nearly as much. So that's all I can say. And then, you know, you get your house to a point where it uses very little energy. I think my heating system at my house uses about 60 watts, which is nothing, you know, hardly at all. And it's heating the house with 60 watts with a real high efficiency circulator. It's very possible to have a house off-grid that uses almost nothing for power. And then the question is, you know, how dependent am I on that, you know? And you can become less and less dependent and still take the advantages of it, but it's kind of one of the big motivators for people to get more efficient. Because if the more efficient you are, the less, you know, less at risk you are. And the more options that you really have. And if you have solar panels on your roof, I mean, it's very easy to add a battery bank. I mean, that's something we do all the time. And that's very common. And it's basically a big uninterrupted power supply, a big UPS system for your house. And we pick stuff, and it's much cheaper and much better if we have less to do with it. But lights, you know, a heating system, you know, maybe some circulation pumps, maybe some high efficiency refrigerators. You know, then you can really get it down. But if you want to heat your hot tub and your, you know, and all your outdoor lighting and, you know, your koi pond, you know, air puffer, then, you know, then it gets ridiculous. So, you know. But that's kind of the way I would approach it, is that the power grid's scary, the gas grid is scary. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things that are scary. You know, your neighbor could be really scary, you know. So.
Yeah.
Just to show about the solar sheet, I don't really know much about it, but it was interesting. I found this website, yoursolarhome.com/solar sheet. And it's like it says a solar air heater designed for supplemental room heating.
Yeah, we've sold these to the government really likes these things. I don't know exactly why, but town of Hot Springs really likes them. We just sold a bunch of them over to eastern Montana, another Forest Service National Parks group. And then people like them in general. What they are is they're a thermal panel, and the way I would treat them is the way I look at them is, you know, your window, you know, you got a big window. That's great. When it's really sunny, you get all the solar gain. I'm sure we've all been, I don't know, my thing is like when you go skiing, you know, and you're at the lodge and the sun comes out and all the sun comes in and it heats up the lodge and it's, you know, really cold outside, but all, you know, so the solar gain is pretty phenomenal, what you can get from sun. The drawback is that you lose it all the second the sun goes away because you've got a giant window there. So a solar sheet like this has a PV module built into it. It is truly independent of everything. When the sun comes out, the PV module lights up, runs a little circulation fan, and there's a thermostat on the wall inside. And what it does is it's essentially brings in a little bit more energy than a window would if it was just there when it's sunny, but it doesn't let anything out. So there's no heat loss associated with it. All you do is you maximize the solar gain, and then you have no loss. So it's a one-way valve for energy coming into your house. It's dependent on the sun, but it is totally independent, and they're pretty amazing, honestly. What you can get out of them, and they're super simple, super basic. And I think there's a lot of, you know, with all the technology and the iPhone apps and everything for your solar system, there's a real desire for simple, basic stuff that just cranks away when it's cold outside. Yeah.
Ted, you had an airplane hangar that was about 42 by 45, and it had a south-facing wall.
Somebody have an airplane hangar?
Yeah. And you wanted to keep it keep it about 40 degrees all winter.
Yeah, these are perfect for that.
How many would you need?
Well, there's these, and then there's another one that's even cooler, and I can show you that. It's made by a company out of Canada called Matrix, and it's the same kind of idea, but it actually is it's actually a metal roofing with perforations in it, and then it draws the air through the perforations, and obviously the metal is but it's perfect for that kind of deal. You know, if you had 5 of these or a couple of these on a, my uncle has one in his shop, and I think shops are really interesting. Shops and buildings like that. Homes are kind of difficult because everybody wants them at 68, 75 degrees. Shops and outbuildings or barns are kind of a different animal. And the deal with heat loss is it's not linear at all. So if I want to keep it at 55 degrees or 45 degrees, I want to keep it above freezing. That's the wild card that everybody throws out there. And the amount of energy required to keep a house from freezing is really, really low compared to the amount of energy required from a heat source to keep it at 72 degrees or 68 degrees. So just a little bit of input makes a lot of difference. What's difficult about these is they're dependent on obviously the weather, the sun, and how many times you open to go flying, and a lot of things like that. So technology like this is very basic. It does a great job, but it's also just kind of a common sense technology. You know, we saw a lot of high efficiency refrigerators, and it's like, how much energy is it going to use? Well, how hot is that turkey when you stuck it in there? You know, I mean, that'll have a lot of effect on how many watts it uses. You know, and so this is kind of the same deal.
Yeah.
Jenny, were you asking something?
Well, I didn't understand where these things went, and I see now, so does this thing goes on the outside, on the roof?
On the wall or the roof.
So it could go vertically on an exterior wall?
It can, and the reason why that's nice is because and it depends where your house is and you know what you have for walls, but if the sun is right here because it's wintertime, or maybe like right here, you know, it's not here in the winter, it's going to be down, and that's pretty much direct shot for your wall. So.
And then there's some way to transfer that heat there?
Yeah, there's 2 holes. There are 4-inch
Holes through the house?
4-inch holes in the wall with 2 ducts, one high, one low, and then a thermostat that looks at the room temperature, and if it can add energy and it's not, you know, middle of summer and hot in there already, it'll turn on a little circulation fan that's powered off of the fan, off of the electric module on the top.
When I first saw the picture of it, I thought it was actually like a window blind
Yeah.
that mounted inside the window, and
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
Well, they've done.
Like a window insert. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at like what people have got excited about in the past, and still, you know, the passive or the active solar houses and stuff, and they just, yeah, they'd have, or trom walls are a big one, you know, there was a lot of those that got put in, and they're basically, you know, you try to, you get solar gain, you get as much as you can, but then you try to control it with big curtains and stuff that go up and down, or, you know, stuff that closes it off or whatever, and this only turns on if the room needs heat and there's sun out there, which is kind of cool. And, you know, they do a really good job. It's amazing how much energy there is when it's sunny outside. I mean, it's 1,000 watts per square meter, so it's a significant amount of energy. I mean, it's kind of, the whole deal is like there is no shortage of energy. Like, you know, it's not like we don't have it. It's just how we use it and how we get it. That's really where the problem is.
So, any other questions about renewable energy options, or can we talk, do you want to move on to a little bit about grants? Tech, okay. And I apologize, the energy efficiency credit actually was 30% at the beginning of the recession, and this year they dropped it back to 15, so it's not 30%, I apologize anymore. The renewable is still 30. And the renewable doesn't have a cap, so if you were putting in a gigantic system, there's no cap on that 30%. But the efficiency tax credit caps at $1,500.
So what's the difference between those two?
Energy efficiency is related to insulation, windows, so just tightening up the envelope of your home. Renewable energy would be related to solar PV, solar thermal, ground source, so any of those, wind.
You know, we do a lot of like condensing boilers, stuff that meets certain criteria, government-y kind of stuff, and it's a percentage. So it's, you know, like the condensing boilers get a $1,500 tax credit. It's 25% of the cost, and it caps at $1,500. So one of the historical things about the tax credits is the government tries to encourage people to do things by controlling the tax credits, or, you know, using the tax code to do that, which is a little bit funky because, I mean, it's interesting, but it's a little funky because you have to have a certain amount of tax liability in order for it to be interesting to you. People don't necessarily take advantage of it like they could because it's complicated and confusing. A lot of doctors and a lot of, you know, people that, you know, have a fair amount of money really take advantage of this stuff. Normal people really don't take advantage of the tax credits as much as they really should. And that's my only problem with it. Other than that, it does encourage people to do things. And what's really interesting about, you know, a couple years ago I was at the solar show down in San Diego, and that's when I think the gloves kind of came off from the government in terms of their support for alternative energy, and they took away the cap off of the PV, and then a little while later they took it off the solar thermal, and the cap was $2,000 before, and so that really meant that you put in a $20,000 system, you know, you only got $2,000, and when they took that cap away, that really changed the dynamic a lot, and so that's been really good for us. And I guess with alternative energy, what unfortunately really drives a lot of it is this tax credit. You know, if I had to point to one thing that really drives a lot of people's motivators.
The PV grant, I think, is the big motivator in Missoula, right? Or in Northwestern Energy, in Northwestern Energy territory right now.
Being able to give people $6,000 from Northwestern is a big deal. And honestly, like, if you're doing a PV system and and you're getting a fair price, and you get a 30% federal tax credit, and you get $6,000 from Northwestern, and you get $500 per taxpayer from the state of Montana, that just turns into kind of a no-brainer. I mean, it just turns into, it just gets kind of ridiculous, in terms of what you're really getting for your money at today's PV prices. It doesn't mean everybody's going to buy one right now, but we ran out of those $6,000 grants 6 months ago, but they're a good deal. Really good deal.
They're a great deal.
Makes the drop in prices and the grants and the tax credits have really turned payback into something for people who do want to know about that. When people used to lead with paid back, you would just politely say, if that's your motivation, this is not the technology for you. But now it's actually dropped payback from an 18 or 20-year type of a thing on the basic 2 kilowatt systems like Aaron has down.
But it also should, it should highlight how sensitive our industry is to that too. Like I would say that obviously that's a big deal for us, and it really helps the industry. But it also, it's something I'm always kind of looking over my shoulder a little bit, and I think everybody should look over their shoulders a little bit, and I think people should really try to figure out when they want to do this move. And what I would say is right now it's a pretty awesome time. It's pretty phenomenal right now. How long that's going to be, who knows? Because the Nix administration might not really like that as much. And
our state nearly axed the state credits this past spring and then didn't.
Yep.
So right now it's game on.
So this is a political deal.
What's your?
Are the Northwestern Energy grants a limited number of grants? Or?
Yeah, they are. We ran through ours and got a second round. I don't know what's up, but they have a certain amount they'll give you, and then you have a little while where you don't have them, and then they'll give them to you again. And so it sounds like Axmen's out. We have some. I think Solar Plexus still has some.
The deal with those, it's kind of a funny deal. It's how much does it cost for the system? Well, let's say it's $15,000. So it's $15,000 up front. Okay, where are you going to get the money? A lot of times we'll have people. The DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality, has a 4% loan.
Here, that's on the next page.
That's helpful. So then you submit all your stuff to them. Then you get the loan. Then you do the deposit then you get the install, then you pay the final price. Then, whenever tax season rolls around, you get 30% back, and then, a month later, you get your Northwest Energy money. So it's kind of, what's interesting about that is the whole system's pretty much geared for people that can come up with $15,000 right now.
Oh,
in
so
a lot of ways. So that's one of my issues with it is, the DEQ is really a critical deal there, because that means people can figure out how to do it. Otherwise, you're looking at a population base that has, $20,000 sitting in the bank that, they don't have earmarked for anything else, and they're just, it's ready to go. So that's the way the tax credits work, and that's why it's a problem. There is a way to turn the tax credit into a credit, or into basically, they'll just cut you a check. But that paperwork is just a disaster. So nobody's really done it.
Which paperwork? DEQ?
No, there's paperwork through the federal government to take that tax credit and turn it into, and I can't remember the word, but basically they'll cut you a check up front before tax season.
Oh, but you get it ultimately on your tax return.
Eventually you do, but everybody's got to wait. So that's why we just got so busy, because everybody's trying to get their systems installed before
Yeah,
Christmas.
fourth quarter is total solar season. It's so funny. And I don't know if it's different because you guys have more do-it-yourself solar installs, or how that differs. But with us, as soon as we do the install and get the paperwork done, Northwestern Energy pays us directly. So with our customers, if it's a $15,000 system, they just need to come up with $9,000, because they pay us pretty quickly directly. And I think it's just a little bit different depending on what your installer is, or how it works. But in the end, you get it, and it's great. And the tax credits are kind of a tricky thing. Aaron was explaining that it can be a little bit confusing. And the one thing I like to explain to people is, first of all, it's not like a deduction. It's a credit. It's an actual credit, and over the course of the year, most people have taxes taken out of their paycheck, or if you're self-employed, you pay taxes throughout the course of the year. And at the end of the year, let's say if you file your taxes and you're like, oh, I'm going to get $500 back. Well, and you think, how can I get a credit? How are they going to give me more? Well, maybe you had $12,000 in taxes taken out and you're only getting $500 back. The government's still holding on to $11,500 of your money, right, that they took out in taxes. So that's where you can get these credits added on. The nice thing about the renewable energy credit too, let's say it's a $15,000 system, the grant brings it down to $9,000, 30% of that is $3,000. You can choose to roll that over for up to 5 years. So if you think your tax liability is going to, let's say, be, this year you might be getting a credit, but for instance, I have a daughter who's going to kindergarten next year, and I'm not going to be able to write off her preschool and her daycare anymore. So maybe it won't be the same for me. I could choose to hold on to my credit until next year when I think my tax liability is going to be different. And so you can roll it over for up to 5 years. And that's pretty cool too. That was part of them sort of taking their gloves off. They wanted it to be a really beneficial thing.
One of the other really neat things, and it kind of, nobody cares about it until the auditors come by and decide what your business or house is worth. But there is, in the fine print, they talk about essentially the idea is that they can't add a lot of value to your home because you've got, they can't add a lot to my business. I just put a $50,000 grid-tied tracker up in front of the business. Well, they can't add that to the tax liability of the business. They can't come along and say, well, you got that extra value there, we're going to tax you on that, which is pretty neat. That means, they can't just come along and penalize everybody that's put on solar. So it's not huge, but it could be huge.
Explain that again, I didn't follow that.
If I was a car wash, this is kind of, we've been doing a couple car washes lately, and we're doing another one up in Polson. And if I was to go into that car wash and spend $80,000 on it or $50,000 on it, the argument could come back and say, wow, you guys put in new boilers, you put in new wallpaper, a new heating system, and they could tax you on that extra value that you've added.
The property tax.
The property tax, yeah. If I put a bunch of solar thermal, a bunch of solar collector on the roof, they can't come around and add that to the value of the property. So
It was just part of what they decided to incentivize the adoption.
because incentive and punish kind of.
Yeah, they don't want to incentivize you and then go ahead and punish you. So it was
Yeah.
part of the incentivization. Yeah,
Right.
to just get you, it was part of the adoption process.
But that's like for this year, right? Maybe next year?
No, it's forever,
Forever?
yeah.
Cool.
So,
But you don't have to worry about putting something on your roof and getting taxed on it later. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But you can definitely sell your house for more.
Yeah.
when you start with $15,000 is a total cost.
Okay,
Subtract 6 from Northwest Energy Credit.
9.
Subtract, I mean,
Now you're at
you're
9.
down to 9. And you subtract 30% for the
Feds.
local tax credit.
So
You're down to 6.
Mm-hmm. And then $500 per Montana taxpayer up to $1,000. So if you're married and you both work, or you're taxpayers, so that would be $1,000. If you're single, it would be $500.
And what's the source of that?
Montana,
Okay.
state credit.
So if you're married, then that brings it down to 5.
Yeah, that was just a hypothetical situation. Right now, the systems are around 12 or 12.5 for that basic 2 kW. So if you subtract the 6, you're at $6,000, and then you subtract 30% of that. You take off 1,800. You're at what, 42, and then you take off 1,000. You're at 32.
So you can get a $15,000 system.
A $12,000 system for $3,200, or a $15,000 system for what is it, $5,000, $4,000.
But even in our case, we're MEC, so it's Missoula Electric Co-op out where we are, and it I don't know, it's fun. Like, it really does change it quite a bit. And the PV has such an appeal. And I guess the deal is, I would just, to step back a little bit, I guess that's why the side eval, and having somebody walk through your home and really treat it like a system. Because everybody's got their technology that's their baby. They love it more than the other ones. And maybe that's what they sell too, coincidentally. And that's kind of the way I see a lot of these systems, that get installed. It's, I'm the PV guy, so I go out and I sell PV, or I'm the boiler guy, so I'm going to go sell a boiler. And I think, the smarter the customers get, the more fun it is for me, because, the more difference we can make. And
Well, and some people come in and they want to integrate 2 or 3 different ones together, and then that's a dream come true. So.
yeah.
So one other neat thing I just wanted to point out is this Google move. This September, they announced a $75 million investment to create a fund with Clean Power Finance. We've been following Clean Power Finance for a while. They're out of California. They're trying to figure out a way to do more massive installation with a financing mechanism that wasn't necessarily tied to, for instance, our DEQ loan, which is the one right above it. They were having a hard time getting banks and figuring it out, and then we had a bit of an implosion in the finance world. But Google recognizes that they make their wealth on all of us using a lot of energy on our computers. So they are doing this big push, and they want to help up to 3,000 homeowners go solar. It's their second investment in residential solar. I don't know all the details on it, but I just thought it was kind of cool. And when these guys asked us to come and they said, what are sort of alternatives to getting into alternative energy? Well, there's these loans and these tax credits and these grants, but there are other things that are constantly happening. For instance, like Google partnering up with a financing mechanism. And I think that's pretty cool too. So I always encourage people to just do a little bit of Googling and see what you come up with.
So is that Google thing a grant or a loan?
I don't know, actually. I think it's a loan because of the way Clean Power Finance does their things. And what I understood when I scanned it is that it's almost like a lease loan. So they buy it and install it, and then you pay it off, I think, to them.
Really?
Yeah, so.
Yeah, alternative energy has become big business. If you look at the people that have invested in all the wind turbines, they're all people living in, the 50th floor in New York City. It's big business. There's a lot of finances behind it. When the government decided to do their tax credits this last round, it kind of freaked them out for a while, because all of a sudden, there was way more people taking advantage of that than they ever thought would do that. So it's big business. You know, when you go to the solar shows, I didn't go to the one in Texas this last week, but I've been to every one for the last 5 years. And the deal is that, you know, you think about your house and what you care about and your system, you know, your hot water system and this and that, and then you go to these solar shows and you realize that, you know, most of these companies are all about, you know, the giant field of collectors. And Montana is such a small dot on the radar, you know. I mean, California is where it's at, you know. I mean, in terms of these companies' mindsets and what they're looking at. So, so everything we do pretty much changes gears, you know, and the product selection and everything else is very different. It's very much for Montana. You know, and that goes into heating systems and everything else. You know, it's, if you look at where our energy goes, you know, everybody in California, you know, they've got air conditioning loads coming out their ears. Up here, it's all about heating loads and how you're going to heat. A lot of performance stuff is really different. You know, a solar thermal collector or a photovoltaic collector actually does the most amount of power, the most amount of output, will stress out your system the most on a cold, sunny day with a snow field in front of it. So we designed for that criteria instead of for, you know, the standard California criteria. So it's pretty interesting. I mean, we are kind of in a different world, and the product isn't necessarily designed for us. It's designed for where the people are.
So we've already talked about resale and payback a little bit, and I think it's funny that I brought up sort of the same thing that you did.
Yeah.
But I think in some instances you have to ask yourself, you know, or you get leather or fabric in your car, granite or laminate in your kitchen, or wood clad or vinyl in your windows, and some of it relates to resale, and some of it relates to aesthetic or personal opinion or what you like or what a mortgage broker or appraiser told you was going to be the best. But ultimately it comes down to what do you like and what's a good investment for you and what works for you in your home, and what do you want to pay and what's the lifetime cost. And so I have a hard time talking payback and with people, but we touched a little bit on some of the payback already. I mean, PV prices have come down so significantly that it's a decent payback. Geothermals, generally 5 years or less. All of these are considered very short payback, and I think Aaron opened up with just a great case. He made a 40-year investment in energy. It's like someone saying to you, for $12,000, your gas price is never going to change. We all know that that's never going to happen for our vehicles, and it's the same type of a concept. You're choosing, and it's not gasoline, it's the sun.
The other side of payback that's really fascinating is you take it out of the alternative energy world, which is where it always hangs out. You're selling solar panels, somebody's always going to ask you about payback. It's just invariable. Everybody wants to know, oh, does it make sense? What's the payback? And then, you know, and it's sometimes not very successful. It's sometimes kind of rude, but, you know, what's the payback on other things that you have bought, you know, in the last, you know, 10 years? I mean, and that's, you know, what's the payback on your kid? You know, that was an article that I read. It was pretty interesting.
Although that one's pretty good, because if people don't have kids, then in 20 years there's no one there to work. So.
Well, it just, you know, it cruises into just about everything, and for whatever reason, alternative energy gets, you know.
Yeah. I did want to not forget, when we were talking about grants and financing, this is a great website, Desire, DSIRE, USA.org. They have a state-by-state map, and then you can see all of the tax credits that relate to your state rules. They go to utilities, loan programs, property tax incentives, industry, corporate, so it's business and residential. And then you can click for residential only, summaries, and federal incentives. And then energizemontana.com, if you click on that, and then you can go over to the alternative energy loan, which takes you to the Montana mt.gov. That just explains to you a lot of the stuff that the state's doing, and that's that DEQ loan, that 10-year 4% loan that you can get for renewable energy. So I just wanted to show you guys a couple of those websites, and I did put the Energize Montana and Desire in here, and I'm going to give a PDF of this to you guys so you can share it if you want.
What I think is just really interesting and really important is, And you know, we talk about solar panels and this and that. What's absolutely fascinating is what efficiency can do worldwide. And if you look at the statistics and stuff, I mean, it's you start picking things apart and going through it and figuring out what would happen if everybody was to do this or that, and everybody's seen the thing. You know, you take out if everybody changed out a compact fluorescent to change out a light bulb to a compact fluorescent, it'd be a coal power plant in back east or something, or maybe in Colstrip. And so the power of conservation is really, really phenomenal. And what's really interesting is if you take initiatives like the European 2012, everybody's got these initiatives that kind of get pushed through, and what they're doing, a lot of times they're talking about increasing the amount of alternative energy. We're going to make our people use more alternative energy. We're going to have 20% of our energy from the sun, or 30% of our energy from the sun, depending on the country.
Or California, 30% by 2020.
Yeah, but if you dig into what they're really doing, they might be jacking up the alternative. There might be a lot of people installing solar. That's great, but they're really going after the efficiency. And the efficiency is really, it's not as sexy, and you can't see it, but the efficiency is where the meat's at. And that's where the cheap savings really is at. And it's so hard to get excited about that. And it's hard to make money selling efficiency, so people don't talk about it. But that really is where it's at.
And I will just say, so I have a 110-year-old house in town near the Good Food Store that I've owned for 10 years. And when I bought the house, my husband, he was my boyfriend at the time, we lived there and had a renter. Since then, we gotten married, had a kid, don't have a renter, had a little person. But we've also blown in insulation in the attic, replaced all the second-story windows, gotten Energy Star appliances, gone with CFLs. We already had a high-efficiency furnace, lucky for us, from the previous owner. Got the hot water, I call it a hot water Snuggie for the heater, the blanket on the heater. Just did all the little things, weather stripping. The first-story windows are historical, so we didn't replace them, but we plastic them. So when I bought the house, and energy rates were significantly lowered 10 years ago, my budget bill was $175, and now my budget bill is $105. And that didn't just happen this year. It's been 105 for a while. It actually went down, went up, and then went down again. And then this past year, we just we sprayed our old rubble rock basement. We had no insulation in a rubble rock basement and no rim joist insulation. So I'm really excited to see what happens this winter. But when a blast of cold air doesn't blow from my basement door into my kitchen, instead it's sort of warm air, that is kind of sexy. So I like that, and I like that my bill is lower. And so I feel like it's hard to sell, and we do it as an add-on, and we wrap it into just people do solar, like Aaron said, and they come to you and you see 800 energy efficiency things wrong, but they want solar. But it's great, because if that's what they want and that's their first step, we can get into talking about all of this stuff next with them, and we'll go through this quickly, because this is where you can do a lot on your own, or you can get help with the things you're not comfortable with. But this is where the biggest changes happen. So insulation, whether it's roof, attic space, crawl space, basement, rim joist, walls, lighting, changing out the bulb or the fixture, air infiltration, which you can go as far as depressurizing your home with blower door testing, or just paying attention to where you feel the cold air coming in. And that can be fixed with caulking, or sometimes insulation, weather stripping, different windows. Ground vapor barrier installation around the slab or your basement. Energy systems and remote monitoring controls. So some people have automatic monitoring with the time of the day, their lights, they'll have them go on, they'll go off, you're not in a room, and that's like in a business too, the light sensors, or do you literally control them remotely? Sometimes people with second homes or children, they come home from school in winter, you're not home from work yet, they want the lights to automatically turn on 20 minutes or half an hour before their kids are coming home from school, other things like that, but therefore you just didn't leave a light on all day. And you can power a lot of the stuff with smartphones and computers. It's pretty cool. We're a Clausen window dealer, and I just like to talk about Clausen because they've made a huge push in the last couple of years to make some high efficiency windows. You can get them with locally harvested small diameter wood. So it's efficient, sustainable, local, and they're competitively priced, and they have an excellent U value, which is how windows are rated, and we've been really impressed with them, and they've performed extremely well in our blower door tests in before and after. I don't know if you want to, I'm just going to try and go kind of quickly through retrofitting stuff, but if you have anything else you want to.
I mean, I guess for me, it was just, I don't like writing bills to Northwest Energy. I mean, that's really where it's at, and I don't like doing things again, so I foamed my roof. I've got I don't know if I want to tell people, they might judge me. I've got a 1975 double wide. And it took all the walls off, redid everything, all new windows, foam roof. The thing is about as tight as anything out there. And I guess what I would say is, if I can do that with a double wide, then I have hope, you know, because I mean, it was a rat trap. I had to get married, and which is absolutely wonderful, but I you know, double wide wasn't cutting it. So it got all redone, and I guess before I did that, you know, I would drive around Missoula, and you know, you want to sell alternative energy and stuff. You drive around Missoula, and you kind of have this sinking feeling in your gut when you looked at people's homes, because you just say, okay, man, like, there's a lot of homes out there that need a lot of work. You know, I mean, and even, you know, my sister bought a brand new house in a development, and you walk into the house and you bang on the walls, and you just know it's like, you know, and you look at their energy bill and stuff, and it's just not all that, you know, and there's a lot of work to do, you know, in terms of energy efficiency. That's, you know, and it's pretty daunting, and but it's also very, very doable. It's pretty much straightforward. You know, you got a hole, you fill it with foam, and my house is honestly one of the nicest houses I've been in a really long time. I love that house. And yeah.
Can I ask you a question about CFLs?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I notice that they say use them in places where you can have the lights on for 3 hours a day or more. Well, what's the problem if you don't have them on for 3 hours? Is that
They die.
You're wasting energy? You could just have an incandescent bulb there, or what?
They don't. They got a ballast. They don't like flipped on and off. If you turn them on and off a lot, they'll die prematurely. And they've changed a lot. I mean, the first CFLs, you couldn't put on a dimmer. You couldn't do this with it. You couldn't do that with it. You couldn't read with it.
Now they make different.
funny,
They
yeah.
make warmer colors now. And
So CFLs have come a long way. CFL is actually pretty old now. I mean, and obviously now LEDs and some of the newer CFLs are phenomenal. So lighting technology is really, it's just like computers or something else now. It's not, it's not the same.
But to answer your question, it was just because of the way they're made. If you flip them on and off, you'll end the life of your CFL prematurely.
So in that case, would it be better to just use an incandescent bulb?
As long as you can, but they won't be available to buy in stores not very long. So then you just.
I don't know if you guys saw when they pulled incandescents off the shelf in England. There was on BBC, and they were showing everybody freaking out, running around, going to the supermarket, clearing,
Probably selling them on eBay.
Yeah. So starting to do that in the U.S.
start hoarding them and then sell them on eBay.
Yeah, there's a black market for those now.
So if you are interested in a home or a business audit, these are some of the areas that you would hope would be covered and people would talk to you about, or things to think about on your own. Thermal envelope insulation and air sealing, vapor barriers and your rim joist, windows and doors, the insulation value, the condition of them, the square footage and the volume of conditioned space, specific homeowner issues, I have circulation issues, I have to keep it warmer. We have an infant. My elderly mother comes and lives with us at a certain time of year, has this. What are your specific issues that you deal with? Mechanical systems, type, efficiency estimate, ducts, air leakage, utility bill analysis, water efficiency, lighting and electrical load management, ideal programming of your thermostats, or if you don't have a programmable, getting a programmable, and then the ideal programming of it. Solar site assessment, obvious vulnerabilities in the envelope or heating system, and easy areas of inefficiency to address with short paybacks. And I like to just say that last point is pretty important if you're going to have someone, whether you're getting a free audit from KEMA or a 1-hour review with someone or a paid audit, you should always be told the easy things that you can do with the quickest payback. In terms of utility bill analysis, just so you guys know too, if you are looking at your own bills and you're wondering kind of where you measure up, the average Montana home for 4 people, a couple thousand square feet, uses about 9,000 kilowatt hours a year. So just if you're interested in knowing kind of where you are. And my 110-year-old Sears and Roebuck kit house uses more than that, even with all the energy savings that we've done. So I'm just trying to get down to 9,000. I was just gonna, let's see, pretty much close with 8 tips for reducing your energy consumption, unless you wanted to add on to audits or.
I would say from an energy audit perspective, my experience has been, well, it's interesting. If you look at the bigger companies out there, there's a lot of what we call performance contractors. So they guarantee performance, and they're a contractor, so they install stuff. And the number one thing that the performance contractors do is lighting, because typically it's commercial stuff, so they'll go in and change out lighting, which isn't terribly sophisticated, and people should be able to figure that out on their own. And there's a lot of money in the performance contractor world, and they're changing out lighting, which is kind of lame, And then there's some other things that they do, but typically when you look at what they do, it's kind of scratching the surface. Like a lot of the performance contractors scratch the surface on things, and they don't really dig too deep into stuff. A lot of the stuff that they address are obvious, and if you pay for an audit and they come out and they tell you something that's obvious and you need to fix it, then it's obvious you need to fix it. What is interesting about side valves and energy assessments, let's put it that way, is a lot of times that they don't dig into the hearts of the issues. They want a solution, and a lot of time a solution that's quick and easy and has a price tag attached to it. Usually it's the homeowner's deal. I always feel like it's the homeowner's deal to really figure out what to do and what really makes sense, and you always kind of use your best judgment, because they'll charge you $700 sometimes to come do something really basic that you could have done yourself. And sometimes sometimes one of the bigger ones will come around and they'll tell you to put a hot water blanket on your hot water heater for $500. So there's a lot of just common sense stuff, and I think if you push on them a little bit, you can get a little more out of it. But there are very real solutions for this stuff. It really make a big difference, and I think I'm really proud of what we've been doing from the heating perspective with boilers, condensing boilers. A lot of the homes are down 30–40%, and that's just with the boiler. We haven't touched insulation, we haven't done this or that, but we're down 30–40% with just the boiler, and so that's pretty awesome. But in order to really give somebody a fair assessment, you can imagine, the stakes are pretty high. You've got to be able to tell them, well, you got to know what they're doing now, how much energy they're using and how that energy is actually getting used. Then you got to stand over here and you have to know what you're doing and how much it's going to use, and then you got to tell them what the difference is. And that's kind of a tricky thing for people to do. So people don't really like to do it very much, and they like to give these huge gray areas like 20, 30, 40%, which is pretty gray. But That's why the performance contractors like the lighting, because they know exactly how much energy the lighting uses. They put a meter on it for a year and they change it out, and they know exactly how much energy the new lights are going to use. It's really straightforward. The tricky stuff is like heating and insulation and stuff like that. I don't think very many insulators are going to say, oh, I'm going to put this insulation up here and I'm going to save you 40% on your energy bill. I'm going to save you 20%. They don't know, because
Yeah.
it's very complicated.
Well, and they don't know how you're going to change your behavior over the next year either.
Right.
Or if we're going to have a bad winter, so it's pretty subjective.
So most of it's common
Yeah.
sense. If it makes sense, then it's
Yeah.
worth doing. If it doesn't make sense, but don't ask for paybacks.
Yeah.
Because nobody's going to give you anything that really matters or makes
Yeah.
a ton of sense.
So our top tips, poor attic air sealing and insulation can represent up to 80% of conditioned air losses. This definitely relates just to insulation, what we're talking about it. Also, uninsulated conditioned basements can represent up to 50% of heat loss in a home. I am certainly hoping that I have a 50% change because of my an uninsulated conditioned basement. We'll see. Air leakage in buildings can represent 5 to 40, here's a big gray area, 40% of space conditioning costs. So typical air sealing measures are like caulking, weather stripping, usually pay for themselves within a year. Duct leakage typically represents 10 to 30% of heating and cooling energy, and this is literally like the duct system that's attached to your furnace or your boiler, and if they're not sealed up, then you're losing your heating or cooling through cracks or holes in the ducts. Or we found out, for instance, that we have this great high-efficiency furnace in our home, and there are returns in the floor on the first floor and returns in the floor on the second floor, and the second floor returns are hooked up to nothing, just vacuous space in the wall. And so that's now what we're going to do this year is actually run a duct from the return on the second floor. I'm like, why is my second floor 52 degrees? Oh, because there's no return. So, and that would relate to duct leakage. Obviously, well, there is no duct, so it's just going into the wall. Water conservation equates to energy conservation. A tremendous amount of water is used in energy production, and it's wasted in excessive use. So pay attention to water use. Optimal settings for programmable thermostats. We recommend an 8-degree setback for at least 8 hours, so that could be sleeping hours or work hours. That can save about 8% a year on heating and cooling. And Northwestern has some rebates, just fine print. Turning your water heater down, a lot of people have them set at 130 or higher, turning them down to 120. And likewise too, speaking of hunting season, we had one of our freezers unplugged and we plugged it in recently, just collecting our fruit and harvest, and then hopefully we'll get an animal this year. And you can turn your freezers up a little, so they're not quite as cold, just like you would turn your hot water heater down a little, and similar savings. Phantom loads are like your coffee maker, you leave it plugged in because it has a clock on, or that your DVD, your TV might have that red light that's always on even when you turn it off. There's tons of phantom loads all over our houses. And when you're really now drilling down into places that you can save energy, phantom loads make up about 6% of our national energy consumption. It's something like $6 billion a year. So this is another one of those, if everybody changed to CFL, if everybody kept their tires properly inflated, if everybody reduced their phantom loads. And you can do that with smart strips, different sorts of power strips. So those were our 8 tips. And the last thing is, you guys asked us just to mention a little bit about the verification and consulting. Obviously, we've touched on a lot of the different places that we work from a consulting standpoint. SBS Solar also has an energy verifier on staff who deals with professional audits and then verification. If you're getting a building permit, the City of Missoula adopted the IECC 2009 energy codes, and all remodels and new construction have to meet this new energy level, and you need to have a third-party verifier. SBS Solar can be your verifier for that. That's just what some of this means. And our energy verifier has gone through the Passive House schooling, which is a German building standard, and it's the most stringent efficiency standard in the world for building. There are passive house homes in Vermont that are heated just by the radiant floor and a pellet stove. They have no furnace, and because they're built so well and so efficient, and they're having a hard time getting insurance policies because an insurer doesn't understand how to insure a home without a furnace in it. So Passive House is pretty amazing, and without going to LEED or going to Passive House, you can still draw on a lot of those tools in your own energy efficiency tightening up of your home or rebuilding. So. Consulting, you guys do, obviously.
Yeah, we do.
Every sale is a consult.
We do, we do free site evaluations. Site evaluations are geared for what we know, which off-grid, is a big part of it. Definitely photovoltaics. We've got an electrician on staff. We've got some pretty bright guys working with us, and we obviously do boilers, heating systems, condensing boilers, radiant floors, biomass boilers. Solar thermal is a big part of what we do. We do a lot of commercial stuff. We do a lot of residential stuff, and what we're trying to do is really give people a picture and really make sure that, my biggest problem with alternative energy is if people buy something, and maybe I should get over myself and just sell stuff, but if people buy something and they don't really understand what it is that they're buying, then there's a very good chance that they won't be satisfied because their expectations are going to be out of whack with what they actually purchased. And so making sure that everybody's expectations are in line typically requires a lot of education. And we just need to be really, so that's kind of the process. So it really is a process. Every sale turns itself into a mini education process, and the goal is to have customers that are really happy with what they've done, and they'll tell their friends, and you'll stay in business for another 30 years and be able to keep your employees happy and be able to grow, hopefully. That's a pretty high standard, I think, really. I mean, to be able to sell systems that really make a difference to customers and really make sure the customer really understands what they're getting. We're not selling cookie cutters systems. It really isn't what we do. But it's a lot of fun. And if anybody wants to see systems operating or running, a lot of times just seeing, a lot of it's just about little boxes, that are pretty boring. But if you want to see the box doing something, you can come out to the store. We have displays operating, and some are better than others. But we put a tracker out front, a 5.4 kW or 5.6 kW tracker, which will be feeding into the store, so that'll be operating. We've got solar thermal working. We've got a wood boiler and a condensing boiler, and all that stuff operates and is working. And so really, we're all about the education. Like if there's one thing we need to do better at, it's figuring out how to educate better. So we've been doing some seminars at the store. We did 3 of them last year. This year we've only done 2. But that's something I really think is important. It's important for the whole industry that people know what this technology is, what it can do, and what it can't do. Because so many people watch a thing on PBS and they come into the store and they want to buy this because they want to get totally off the grid, and sometimes it's just not possible. So
I think the hardest thing about the whole process and kind of the best analogy that I make is when you assess the health of your whole body and when something's going wrong, it's usually not just one thing, like your headache's related to the fact that you didn't drink enough water, or you're allergic to this, or your medicine's not working, or whatever. I mean, everything's just complicated and related, and your home's energy health is sort of the same way. And one home and one person are never the same as the other one. And so the entire process is always an education process. I think that goes both ways, and a consultative process, because it's not just about a hot water Snuggie. It's about the whole system and the whole energy health of your home, because that can be a symptom of something else that's going wrong. And if you're going to go through the process, there's a lot you can do on your own. But then I suggest making sure you tap into someone that has the certifications and knows what they're doing. Obviously, the guys at the Axmen are great, and we feel really good about our energy team, because it can be confusing, and it is energy health. It is whole home energy health.
What the rest of the world is doing is, I mean, I wouldn't say the rest of the world, but most of the world that's worried about energy or they have high energy prices, the government comes in and says, you will do this. You know, you're going to be efficient. You bought a house, you know, it's a 500-year-old farmhouse in Sweden. Well, you're going to come in and you're going to put in all this new stuff. You're going to do this. You're going to make it this efficient. That's the end of the story. You know, obviously the city of Missoula has got some energy standards now, and the government's trying to regulate it and push it, and that's an option. I mean, that's an option for our future. That might be the way it goes. But the other option is that people make the decision that they want to do things as intelligently and as smart as they can. And for that option, we just need educated people that care. And that's the option that I prefer.
I feel very fortunate to have had you both here tonight, and I really liked your concluding comment.
Yeah.
Because it's up to us to educate ourselves and to educate our friends and neighbors and go forward on our own if we can. And that was actually kind of the whole point of tonight, to give us some basis for moving ahead. So thank you two very much, and I really appreciate it. So thanks for coming, everybody. We appreciate your attending, and thanks again to you two.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank
you guys
you
are the
so
hardcore
much.
ones.
Yeah. Thanks.